Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Dark Side. I'm your host, Sherry. Today, we've got a story out of Brooklyn, New York. There's two things I know a lot about: true crime and pizza. Today's story covers both topics. A beloved co owner of a famous pizza shop is gunned down outside of his home. This has all the characteristics of being a mafia hit, but is that really what it is? Did it have something to do with the stolen sauce recipe from years before? It's almost like something out of a Godfather film. My sources are in the description area. This is episode 138, The Case of Louis Barbati. This story takes us back to 2016. El Chapo was captured by Mexican authorities. Mother Teresa became a saint. Chicago Cubs won their first World Series since 1908. The movie Back to the Future predicted they would win in 2015, so they were a year off. The Summer Olympics took place in Rio. And in weird news from 2016, the clown sightings. People were dressing up as clowns and coming out at night. Some would be standing on the edge of a forest or under a streetlight. You'd be driving along and would see a clown holding balloons and waving, just to freak people out, and it worked. Everyone was suddenly scared of clowns. Even Stephen King took to Twitter to tell people to chill with the talk of evil clowns, saying most clowns are good and mean no harm. I never saw a random clown in 2016, but I wish I did. I'd probably wave back. I heard about this case one night. I was flipping around through streaming services and saw a show called PD True on Paramount, and it was these hardened NYPD detectives who were meeting in a bar to discuss memorable cases they had worked on. These guys have seen everything. One of them mentioned the Louis Barbati case, and they began talking about it, and it really caught my attention. I thought I would share this with you because someone had told me recently that they wanted to listen to From the Dark Side podcast, but they didn't have a long attention span, and that's fine. But I thought this would be a good opportunity to do a short one for those who don't have a long attention span. This case is solved, but it's unsolved. I know that's weird, I'm sorry, but I'll get into what I mean later. On 86th Street in Brooklyn, New York, there is a famous Italian pizza restaurant called L&B Spumani Gardens. It has been family owned and operated since 1939. They claim to have the best Sicilian slices New York City has to offer. Our story is about Louis Barbati. He was known affectionately to family and friends as Lulu. He is 61 years old and one of the co-owners of L&B Spumani Gardens. His great-grandfather came to the United States from Italy in 1917 and used to peddle his pizzas around using a horse and wagon until he eventually opened a restaurant. This restaurant has been in Louis's family for the last 86 years. Louis has been featured on TV shows and news stations showcasing his pizza. I watched him work and was starving looking at these pizzas he was making. A typical slice from this place comes in the shape of a square. It's dough and then mozzarella cheese and then sauce and then Parmesan Romano on top. But they have tons of other Italian foods. They're just mostly known for their Sicilian pizzas and their sauce. This sauce I will bring up later. Louis has been married for the last 25 years. They have two sons who are 18 and 24. Louis looks like he's right out of Italy. He's been making pizzas for over 40 years and could probably make a pizza with his eyes closed and turn out way better than mine. He spent most of his life behind the counter at L&B Spumani Gardens. He's extremely talented at making tasty Italian dishes, and I'm sure his great-grandfather, who came here from Italy and opened this restaurant, would love to see what he's done. As a side note, any case I cover, if it's taken place in the last 10 years or so, I always go back and look on my iCalendar to see what I was doing on that day of the crime. I looked back to June 30th, 2016. I didn't have anything going on that particular day, but earlier that week I was in Brooklyn, New York for a metal show, and what did we do? We stopped at a pizza shop. I remember this day very well because it was the worst hangover I ever had in my life and I needed food. It wasn't L&B Spumani Gardens though, it was Triangulo Pizza on Manhattan Avenue. But now I wish I would have gone to L&B's and I could have possibly met Louis. On June 30th, 2016, emergency services receive a frantic call from a woman screaming at the top of her lungs. She said her husband wasn't breathing. Get here and save him. It was one of the saddest calls I've ever heard. This woman was seriously freaking out and full-blown hysterical. Hearing the pain in her voice was hard to listen to. When the police and ambulance arrive, they find the body of 61-year-old Louis Barbati outside of his home. He is laying on his stomach on the brick stairs at the entrance of his home. There were only a few steps on this staircase. His feet were at the top of the steps and his head was at the bottom, and he was laying on his stomach. Louis had been shot 5 times. It looked like he was coming home from work and someone stopped him before he went inside his house. It looks like he was going in the side entrance to his house next to the driveway. It definitely wasn't the front steps. This is a 4,000 square foot $1 million house in Diker Heights, Brooklyn, so there's multiple entrances. His wife of 25 years was inside and she had been cooking dinner. She comes out wearing her apron and the table was set for her and her husband and their sons. The whole situation is just so sad. They ask her if she heard anything. She said she heard a noise, but she didn't know that they were gunshots. Either this killer used a silencer or it was because it's just a few days before the 4th of July and people had been letting off fireworks a lot. But either way, she never knew these were gunshots. Once the medical examiner arrives and declares Louis deceased, and he does a preliminary exam, he gives the detectives permission to move the body from its position on the steps. They lifted him up, and underneath him was a grocery bag. You couldn't see it until the body was moved because he was laying on top of it. Inside the bag was a loaf of Italian bread and a large sum of money. $15,483 in cold hard cash is just sitting there in this grocery bag with the bread. This killer must not have known about the cash, or it wasn't important enough to take. The NYPD will be handling this murder investigation. They are the largest police department in the world with 36,000 employees, so they've got plenty of officers and detectives to solve the case quickly. Plus, they have the experience. Sometimes we discuss cases in rural towns where there's a murder every 50 years and it becomes the police department's current staff's first murder case. But for the NYPD guys, this is just another Thursday. They talked to neighbors and no one saw or heard anything except for one guy. He said he saw a white Acura TL parked on the street that shouldn't have been there. So these houses each have a driveway, but the street parking was awful. If you know what it's like to park in a city, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. They asked him what year this Acura was. He says it was a 2012 or 2013. He says it's a white Acura TL, and he says a few more details about the car. The cops are interested in why he knows so much about this car. He says, well, I'm a mechanic. Cars are my life. So they ask him, well, how do you know it wasn't supposed to be parked there? And he says, well, he was parked in my spot. They pull the surveillance from Louis's house. Louis had a camera set up that pointed at his driveway. It shows Louis coming home from work. He goes around to the back of his SUV and grabs a bag out of the back, and then he walks towards his house. The camera on his deck showed him after he was shot. He can be heard yelling for help, and then you see his wife come running out the back door and trying to help him. The shooter isn't in any of these frames of video. Who shot Louis in broad daylight, and why didn't they take this bag of cash? And why shoot him 5 times? It seems excessive. The first thought is maybe this was a mafia type hit. As soon as the word mafia is brought up, the FBI comes in. They have to go back to 2009, 7 years before our story. They learn a man named Francis Guerra was involved in some mafia type activity. Francis was married to a member of L&B Spumani Gardens ownership team. Francis is a mob associate to the Colombo family, a pizza shop in Staten Island owned by the Bonanno crime family, allegedly stole the sauce recipe from L&B's. They opened their shop and even advertised in big letters outside. Pizza just like L&B's. That's a super shitty thing to do, by the way. Well, the owner of this pizza shop in Staten Island was allegedly threatened by Francis for stealing this sauce recipe and blatantly advertising their business as a copy of L&B's. Francis was eventually cleared in a trial in 2012. The trial was for extortion of a former L&B's employee who allegedly gave away this sauce recipe. And he was acquitted of a double murder of a former underboss and a club owner. It sounds like this was his lucky day in court because he got off on everything. When neighbors and associates hear that this could have something to do with the mafia, everyone gets really quiet. The police who went back to re-interview people suddenly found doors closing on their faces. Nobody wants anything to do with this investigation anymore. No one wants to help. They're scared. I can understand why. Most people wouldn't want to piss off the mob. Because this could have mafia ties, again, the FBI is involved. Well, their investigation determines that there's no real connection between this killing and the mob. Even the mob is like, yeah, this isn't us. We didn't do this. There was a sit-down meeting between two crime families that had taken place a while back that sort of settled the dispute about the sauce recipe. Things had cooled down a lot recently, and the sauce recipe drama was over. I'm sure you're all wondering why Lewis was carrying $15,483 in cash at the time of his death. We learned that 6 times a year, the owners of L&B's are given cash bonuses. The co-owners split the pot and everyone takes home a bonus. Well, June 30th, 2016 was that day. Lewis and the others had gotten their cash bonuses, but the killer didn't take the money. It was right there, laying in a bag under his body. All signs are pointing to a botched robbery. An inquest into any life insurance showed that in the event one of the co-owners died, their portion would be bought out by life insurance. That is 100% normal anytime you have co-owners of a business. That happens all the time, and there's nothing suspicious there. Police get to work pulling camera footage from the street and areas around. They see the white Acura drive down Lewis's street. Something that stood out to them was hanging from the rearview mirror was a red tree air freshener. You know those little tree air fresheners? They're super common. So that's one distinguishing thing. They see a man out walking around who looked like he didn't belong there. He was wearing shorts and a dark-colored hoodie. First off, it's like 90 degrees in the city that day. You only wear a hoodie if you've got something to hide. They know he's likely carrying a gun. He appeared to be a white man in his mid-30s. This man circles the block a few times right past Lewis's house, and then he parks his white Acura on the street. This is likely our killer lying in wait for Lewis to come home. Crime Stoppers puts up a $2,500 reward for whoever can identify this man in the surveillance walking down Lewis's street. Lewis's family says, we'll top that. We'll put up $50,000 to whoever can identify him. Well, that got people calling in to the tip line. They each gave the same name, Andy Fernandez. Even his child's mother called in and said, yep, that's Andy. We learn Andy is a former construction worker. He's around 40 years old. He looked exactly like the guy in the video. He had a minor criminal history, nothing too major. His car was a white Acura, again, a white Acura. He is originally from Brooklyn, but currently lived in Long Island. The FBI has a lot more money and resources to help with this investigation. They are able to do a cell phone tower dump. A cell phone tower dump is a collection of phone numbers and other data from all devices that connected to a cell tower over a specific period of time. It'll show every cell phone that was in the area at that time. I recently learned that a cell phone tower dump is approximately $10,000 each time, and I had no idea. By doing this tower dump, they placed Andy's cell phone at Lewis's house during the time of the murder. They go to Andy's house and peer in the garage, and there they see a white Acura TL sitting in the garage. He's got the little red tree air freshener still hanging from the rearview mirror. This has to be the dumbest criminal alive. Inside his apartment, they found the hoodie he was wearing in the surveillance video walking down Lewis's street. Inside his wallet was a business card, and on the back of it was Lewis's name and address written down. This makes me wonder if he was a hitman, but there hasn't been any evidence to show that he was hired by anyone. In fact, all evidence shows that he did this all on his own. On November 3rd, 2016, 4 months after the murder, Andy Fernandez is arrested for the murder of Louis Barbati. I'm bothered because our killer grew up in Brooklyn. He was 20 years younger than Louis. He likely spent a lot of his childhood going into L&B's and having pizza made by Louis. But there's no connection that police can find between Andy and Louis. All they have is his address written on a card in his wallet. At the very beginning, I mentioned this case was solved, and it is. We have the killer in custody. But I also mentioned that it's unsolved, and that is because we don't have a motive. Andy requested a lawyer and refuses to talk. Andy still to this day refuses to give a motive for why he killed Louis. Prosecutor Emily Dean said people kill for logical reasons and people kill for illogical reasons. Sometimes people take those reasons to the grave. That is exactly what Andy is doing. He won't tell anyone. The prosecution's theory is that this is a robbery attempt gone wrong. He somehow knew about the cash bonuses that were given out 6 times a year. We do learn that Andy had been to L&B's earlier in the day before Louis was killed. We know this because his cell phone data placed him at the restaurant. But it's not like the owners sit in the dining area doling out large amounts of cash to each other in front of customers. That kind of stuff took place behind closed doors. Louis's family said they had never seen Andy before in their lives, just the day of the murder when he came into the restaurant. If he knew Louis would have his cash on him, he laid in wait for Louis to come home and shot him. But he didn't take the cash. I would like to know why he shot him 5 times in broad daylight. Once or twice would have done the trick. It seems like overkill to shoot that many times. And it seems super risky to do it in daylight when people in this fancy neighborhood are coming home from work. Since he didn't take the money, it makes me wonder if there was a different motive. Did Louis cut him off in traffic one day and Andy held a grudge and tracked him down? Did he bump into him on the street? There's a million other theories we can come up with, but only Andy knows the truth. Andy is not affiliated with any crime families, so there goes the mafia theory. According to reporting by the New York Daily News, Andy was addicted to crack cocaine and had lost his family recently and everything he had worked for. Immediately after his arrest, he was taken to the hospital because he was under the influence. Yeah, it's sad that he was addicted to drugs, but that does not excuse murder. Most of us know someone who was in a similar situation as Andy's, and most don't go kill someone. Andy was found guilty of second-degree murder and second-degree criminal possession of a weapon and sentenced to 24 years to life in prison and is eligible for parole in 2040. He still won't tell anyone why he killed Louis. Louis's family is tortured by the fact that he won't give a motive for why he killed their loved one. All they can go on is what the prosecution believed happened. Louis came home and Andy attempted to rob him and things went awry and Andy shot Louis multiple times and fled. Andy's lawyers say he's just a fall guy. He says his client is innocent and not the real shooter. Louis's cousin, Phil Grimaldi, is a retired NYPD detective. He sat down with a news reporter named Amanda Bossard and went into his reason for why he believes Louis was targeted. He's his cousin and has known him for many years. He says Louis was a happy-go-lucky guy. He spent all his life behind the counter at L&B's making pizza and ringing up customers. He was a big guy, but he says he never once heard Louis raise his voice to anyone or even speak in anger. He says on the evening of June 30th, 2016, he got a call from a family member saying Lulu had been shot. Lulu was Louis's nickname. Phil, although he's retired, he can still show up to a crime scene and go past the police caution tape and get the scoop on what happened. He arrives and goes inside to console Lewis's wife, who is still wearing her apron and she's covered in blood. He says it was pure chaos, people crying and screaming. He says that bag of money had a rip in it. This indicates that Andy may have tried to pull it out of Lewis's hands and Lewis held on to it. A struggle had taken place. Again, Lewis is a big guy. He could easily outpower this robber until a gun comes out. Video surveillance showed that Andy exited his car and hid behind a tree, waiting for Lewis to come around the corner to the side entrance to his home. He says one of the detectives told him this was like amateur hour. This is likely this guy's first attempted robbery. He tried to grab the bag and he couldn't get it, so he got pissed off and fired his gun 5 times. He runs back to his car and is shown speeding away from the scene. This murder was completely senseless and should not have happened. A good man lost his life. And for what? I think back to the singer Selena Quintanilla Perez, who was shot and killed by her fan club president Yolanda Saldivar in 1995. They were friends. Yolanda has been in prison for 30 years and still won't tell anyone the motive for why she killed her. Andy seems like he's going to take his reason to the grave as well. L&B Spumani Gardens is still open today. In January 2024, they opened a second location using the same special season pans as their original location. You can still get the same L&B pizza and other Italian dishes there. Rest in peace to Louis Barbati. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care, and much love to you all.